We all know what abilities are. Since Generation 3's Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, every Pokemon has a unique ability that can help them in battle. A feature that had a massive impact on battling itself. But what if I told you a lot of these abilities actually had uses outside of battling? I'm Professor Brasher, and today we'll be going over every Pokemon ability with a hidden use outside of battle. Before we start, I'd just like to preface that although a good amount of these will work in most games from Pokemon Emerald onwards, there are a few that get removed, added, or changed throughout the generations, so keep that in mind. But without further ado, let's get into the abilities. Now listen, I think it's safe to say we've all been in the predicament of being constantly attacked by wild Pokemon, whether in caves or tall grass. It can make a simple trip take so much longer. Now yes, there's repels, but in earlier games you constantly need to keep going into your bag to reapply a repel, which can get annoying. And during early game, repels can be quite costly when you don't have that much money, and that's where the ability Intimidate comes in. In battle, it lowers the opponent's attack, sure, but what you might not know is that if your Pokemon with Intimidate is first in your party and at least 5 levels higher than the wild Pokemon, Intimidate will provide you a 50% chance at avoiding that wild encounter. Not a bad way to avoid encounters for free. Now, there are a few abilities that share the same out-of-battle effects on this list, and Intimidate is one of them. The ability Keen Eye also grants the same effect. Our next set of abilities are going to be Hustle, Pressure, and Vital Spirit, all of which share the same out-of-battle effect. So, if you don't know the basics of route encounters, in most instances, every route or location will have a certain Pokemon that appear there, and their level is usually never a set amount. They will typically be within a range, between levels 13 and 20 for example. Well, if a Pokemon in your first slot has one of these 3 abilities, when encountering a wild Pokemon, there will be a 50% chance that that wild's Pokemon level will be forced to the upper bound of their level encounter range. So, using the previous example, you'd have a better chance of encountering said Pokemon at level 20 rather than level 13. Now, this next one actually pairs with a move. In fact, this will be a little sneak peek at a part 2 for this video, where instead of abilities, I'll be going through every move that can be used outside of battle, so keep your eyes peeled for that. That being said, this next ability is Hyper Cutter. If you weren't aware, you're able to use Cut outside of battle to chop down tall grass within a 1 square radius, but with the ability Hyper Cutter, that radius grows to an even larger 2 square radius. Our next set of abilities are going to be Flame Body, Magma Armor, and Steam Engine. Once again, all 3 of these have the same out-of-battle effect. If you've even somewhat looked into abilities or used the breeding feature in Pokemon games, this one should be pretty common knowledge. All 3 of these abilities have the amount of steps needed to hatch an egg, a very valuable ability for anyone looking to breed Pokemon. So, we went over how to avoid wild Pokemon with Intimidate and Keen Eye, but what if you're looking to actually increase your encounter rate? Whether you're hunting a rare spawn, a shiny Pokemon, or just training your Pokemon in the grass and want to cut down the time in between encounters, the abilities Arena Trap, Illuminate, and No Guard got you covered, all of which double your encounter rate. Speaking of encounters, we have Cute Charm. When the Pokemon with Cute Charm is first in your party, the ability will give you a 66.7% chance at encountering a Pokemon of the opposite gender of your Pokemon, assuming the wild encounter can be said gender, of course. Now, we all know how tedious it can be trying to get a rare item from a wild Pokemon, but thankfully there's a way to help increase those odds. Both Compound Eyes and Super Luck have the effect to increase the odds of a wild Pokemon holding an item. Common items will go from the standard 50% chance up to a 60% chance. Uncommon items will go from a 5% chance to a 20% chance, and rare items will go from a 1% chance up to a 5% chance. Now, let's say for some reason you really just want the honey held item. Definitely a common scenario, am I right? All jokes aside, the ability Honey Gatherer gives you a chance for said Pokemon to pick up honey after a battle. The odds themselves depend on the Pokemon's level. Between levels 1 to 10, there's a 5% chance to pick up honey, and the odds go up by another 5% every 10 levels, for a grand total of a 50% chance between levels 91 to 100. Here's two quick ones. First up, immunity. This ability just makes said Pokemon immune to poison damage outside of battle. And secondly, Infiltrator. This ability decreases the chance at generating a random encounter by 87.5%. Next up, Lightning Rod. This ability doubles the amount of calls you get on your Pokénav in Pokemon Emerald. It also has a second effect in Sword and Shield that we'll get to later. This one's a personal favorite of mine, the ability Pickup. Just like Honeygather, this ability gives you the chance to, well, pick up an item after battle, but this time there's a whole list of good items you're able to get. Now, the items you can get and their drop percentages slightly change between games, so I won't bore you with naming out every single chart, but for the most part, you have a wild selection of items like healables, nuggets, evolution items, held items, vitamins, and rare candies. This ability can be a great way to stock up on money and rare candies when using a full team with the pickup ability. Quick Feet, Stench, and White Smoke are next. All three of these are basically a better version of Intimidate and Keen Eye. Just like them, they provide a 50% chance at avoiding a wild encounter, but without the need to be at least 5 levels above the wild Pokemon. Speaking of wild encounters, we have Sandveil and Snowcloak. Just like previously mentioned, Sandveil and Snowcloak also provide a 50% chance to avoid a wild encounter, but only in an area with a sandstorm for Sandveil or an area with hail for Snowcloak. Yeah, not very convenient. Up next is Serene Grace. Now, this only works in Heart Gold and Soul Silver for some reason, but if a Pokemon with said ability breaks a rock and finds an item, the game will instead pick an item one category rarer than what it would have been. So, say you would have gotten a common item, the game would change it to an uncommon instead. These next two abilities will help with those pesky fish Pokemon. Both Sticky Hold and Suction Cups will make fishing encounters happen more often. Now, this one's definitely a little strange, and it involves something you might not have even noticed while playing. The ability Swarm causes the cries of wild Pokemon to happen more often in Pokemon Emerald. Why only Pokemon Emerald? I'm not too sure, considering overworld Pokemon cries are also in other games like Sun and Moon and the Ultra games. Maybe Game Freak just realized how useless this effect is. Next up is Synchronize. Now, out of all the abilities with out-of-battle effects, this one has changed the most throughout the games. For the most part, it will at the very least give a chance at making a wild encounter have the same nature as the Pokemon with Synchronize. I won't go over every game's slight change on it, but to keep it brief, the main things that do change are the odds of the nature passing and what category Pokemon it can pass to. We have one group of abilities left. Before we get to it, if you've made it this far and are enjoying the video, consider liking and subscribing. Now, time for the final abilities. This last group of abilities all basically give a 50% chance at encountering a certain type of wild Pokemon whenever possible, of course. Flash Fire for fire types, Harvest for grass types, Storm Drain for water types, both Lightning Rod and Static for electric types, and Magnet Pull for steel types. And that, ladies and gents, is every single Pokemon ability with an out-of-battle effect. Comment down below which of these you knew and which you didn't. Until next time, keep exploring, keep catching, and as always, stay legendary.